All right, welcome to Fed Pilot again. We're going to talk about 2023 TSP changes and some of the things we were expecting, some of the things we weren't expecting, and some of the things that are supposed to happen aren't happening. With what's happening with the TSP, we're not surprised, but let's dive in. Welcome to Fed Pilot, where we help make federal retirement benefits understandable for humans like you. All right, Cassie, welcome. Oh
Hello,
boy.
Kevin.
2023 TSP changes. There are a few changes. Let's talk about these.
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah, there are. I mean, not we're not just talking about what the TSP has changed since last June. By the way, I got to say this. When I go around and do workshops, whether it's in person or webinar, I always ask how many people know about the changes about the TSP. Guess how many people don't even know that there were changes? What
I would
percentage would
say
you say?
probably 90 to 95% don't even realize how many
You're about
changes.
right. Yeah. And that blows me away. And I think, wow, you
I
guys
mean,
haven't told you about this.
well, and here's the thing. It's not that they haven't told them. It's that people aren't listening or paying attention. And I'm just going to be completely honest. And I know this because I was at the FAMA convention this past October down in Orlando. And then I was able to also be at the ATCA or NACA convention as well out in DC in November. And so just talking to the employees themselves and getting their feedback about, you know, they don't keep up because there's so many emails going out from OPM, from TSP, from all of these different places. They can't keep
Gotcha.
up with everything. And with the amount of changes that TSP has rolled out in the past 6 months, 8 months, I don't blame them. There has been so much going on. And then some of it's just normal, right? Like, oh, now we're increasing the contribution limit for the year. That's happens every year, right? Now it's 22,000 for regular contributions and 7,500 for catch-up contributions. So people,
22.5.
I'm sorry, yeah,
You said 22. Yeah,
22,500.
22.5.
Ha ha ha! You're
Yeah,
right. Oh
yeah.
gosh. Um, but it's just so that now people can contribute 30,000 total if they're over the age of 50. If you're under the age of 50, 22,500. So you can still contribute a fair amount, right? So just talking about like that stuff is just normal. But there's
Right.
been so many other changes that have happened with the new rollout for the mutual fund window. Um, some other legislation that has happened to increase RMDs and think, big legislation. The Secure Act 2.0 came out. TSP is still identifying what rules that apply to them so they can implement that and make it available for employees. They're just behind on that sort of things. And then there's also, because of this big rollout that happened back in June with the mutual fund window and having to do a complete revamp on the tech side, there's other issues that are coming about that participants are struggling with. I mean, not just the bugs that were figured out in the beginning, and
Right.
that took an amazing amount of time to get through, and it's just understanding how things are working again within the TSP because things have changed for the advisors as well, where they have to list an address for 7 days if they're trying to roll and lose money. I mean, it's not for advisors really, it's for their participants because normally, even if they were buying an annuity or something else, an investment directly, they still have to go through those steps too. So it's not just the advisors, it's for the employee. You know what? I get it provides a level of security, right? But then, like the spousal consent on what that would look like for a rollout or transfer or withdraw is completely different. It's all electronic now,
Yep.
right? So
Sure
there's been
is.
so many changes over the past few months. And really, for an employee to keep up on just the TSP side could be overwhelming, not to mention all of the other changes that have been happening within an agency or within OPM or any of that. And so,
Right.
so let's talk about a little bit about what those changes are. We've got the annual increase,
Right.
the Secure Act 2.0.
And to be, and you mentioned that, and it's really hard, and I'll just say this right up front. It's really hard to sometimes say these things because when we say them, we say this is how it is, but there's actually a little bit more detail, and we could go on and on with detail and detail and detail. For example, you said if you're over 50, this is what it is. If you're under 50, this is what it is. If we're going to get into a little bit more detail, it's in the year that you turn 50 or more, you can do the catch up contributions. If you
Right.
are going to retire in the year that you turn 49 or below, and that's the kind of thing that I think trip people up because that's long-winded, right? No one, no, I mean, we could say that, but that would bore people to death. Number one. Number two, unless you're there, unless you're at 49 or 50, you're not thinking about that. And
Right.
so you really don't care about that level of detail. So for you and I, trying to hit the right level of detail at any one given point in time is difficult. It's a balancing act. So
Yeah. We're just trying to make sure that people are informed as much as possible
yeah,
with as much or as little detail, like finding that balance, giving them enough to where it's helpful, but not giving it too much to where it's not over the top. Is
right,
that's really what we're trying to do and making sure that people just understand kind of the general overview. And then hopefully they go to your Fed pilot workshops and they can get a little bit more detail on that. And then they can meet with the advisor and get a little bit more detail in bite-sized chunks, enough to digest, you know, everything that they need to pertaining to them and how it works for a certain situation, rather than just telling them like this is how it works, because that's not always the case for an individual situation either.
right. Yeah. For example, well, diving into the Secure Act here, one of the provisions of the Secure, well, okay. So one of the revisions of the Secure Act changes how special provision dealt with their TSP if they retired before 49 and before in that year. Um,
Yes.
and said, okay, if you're 50 and over, you have access to your TSP. If you retire 49 and below or that year, then you don't. And Secure Act changed that, but and what they changed it to was no, that rules out whenever you retire, you can have access to your TSP. But Cassie, what did they change? What did they supposedly change?
Yeah. So, I mean, they changed the required minimum distribution, but let's talk about what you're talking about and the special provision side. So, the Secure Act does change where an employee is not required to have the age limit met. So, for instance, with special provision employees, there's two requirements that have to be met in order to retire from the federal government. Okay, and that's that they have to be either age 50 with 20 years of service or any age with 25 years of service.
Right,
So essentially, from what I've read and seen, the Secure Act is pretty much implementing the same requirements for retirement into the requirements for moving money out of the TSP. So
right,
it's not, restricted to simply retiring in the year in which you turn 50, and then you can avoid penalties because there's a 10% penalty if you move your money out of an investment, typically too early in life, right? It's a simple
right,
age requirement where if you were to take a withdrawal from any regular investment, and this is outside of the TSP, any regular investment, you have to be 59 and a half, or you're subject to a penalty, typically a 10% penalty. Well, with TSP, there's a couple of other we'll say different age limits for certain employees that they can have penalty free access to the TSP. And so with special provision, again, it's any age. I'm sorry, they have to retire the year in which they turn age 50 in order to qualify for that with the TSP.
Right.
But for retirement, they have to meet the other requirements, right? So if somebody were 45, even if they have 25 years of service, they're not getting penalty free access to their TSP
Right.
until age 59 and a half. So they have to wait that much longer to be able to access their TSP without penalty, even though they may have more years of service that somebody had if they're retiring at age 50 with 20 years,
Right.
right? And so essentially, the Secure Act is trying to, again, mimic the retirement requirements for the federal government into the Secure Act and when they can take that money out of certain investments. So um,
Which
essentially,
overall,
if they have 25 years of service, or if an employee has 25 years of service and retires, then they would automatically get the penalty free access.
right. Which again, overall is a good thing, because one of the difficulties of this whole of retirement period is that requirements for retiring is different than retirements for your TSP, which is different than requirements for another piece of information. And so, or another benefit. And so to have those linked up sounds great, right? Overall, oh, they're the same rules for each one and it makes sense that way. But in this one, so they're linking it up. But what's the disconnect now, Cassie?
The disconnect is that the TSP does not recognize that legislation yet. So,
Wait a minute. Wait a
although,
minute. Is that possible for them just to not recognize it?
well, and it's okay. TSP takes longer to implement certain things, right? So this
Right.
legislation just happened the end of January, or no, I'm sorry, the end of December, and they're still weeding through everything because there's a whole lot more to it, right? So, like I talked about before, it also changed the requirement. I'm sorry, the required minimum distributions
Right.
for an employee, right? And or I'm sorry, retiree, because if they're employed, they're not required to
Mm-hmm.
take those distributions until they're retired and have met a certain age. So the Secure Act that passed last year changed the required minimum distribution age from 70 to 72. Well, now the Secure Act 2.0 changes it to 73, and then by I think it's 2020
2020.
2033. Sorry.
Okay.
So over the next 10 years, it's going to increase little by little to where the required minimum distribution age will be 75 by 2033. And so that's all changing, and they're having to recognize that and implement that within the system. So they're still reviewing the Secure Act 2.0 and all that it has and all the changes, because if they're going to implement this new withdrawal, how much does TSP already have to change again
Right.
after just changing their system 6 months ago?
Right.
And I was just reading um, because I wanted to make sure I had all this information up, that they put out another bulletin on February 3rd regarding the installment payments. There's an issue with that because participants are unable to have their installment payments processed at an amount that they want. And so there's a whole
Oh,
number of
interesting.
situations that TSP is dealing with, on top of other problems that political situations are changing.
Right.
That's a whole other can of worms for TSP because they're having problems with the G fund.
So basically, they're just trying to get it working right, let alone what the government's throwing at them as what they can do. So, yeah, when was it? It was, well, it was a few weeks ago, about a month ago. I was in New Hampshire doing a workshop, and the special provision people there were saying, well, no, it does, it's not, the Secure Act changed everything. And I'm like, yeah, it theoretically changed it. Functionally, nothing has changed yet. So
Right.
you have to
Exactly.
wait until TSP catches up. You have to wait until TSP implements it. So just because it's a law doesn't mean that the law is being enforced right now. And
Right.
and that's really important, I think, for people to understand. Is that oh, okay, I can go make these changes. Well, hold on. You gotta you gotta move at the speed of government, which is
Right. Exactly. Exactly, which is not happening very quickly at all.
no, it's
I mean, it
not.
took them, golly, what, almost 10 years to roll out the mutual fund window from a legislation that had happened or that gave them permission back in 2004, 2002, or something like that, like ridiculous. It was way back in the early 2000s that they were given the permission to have the mutual fund window.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that. So that's 20
2008,
years?
2009. So
No
it has
way.
taken them how many years to actually implement the mutual fund window? And I might even have that year wrong. I'd have to go back and look at it. But when it first came out, I was like, wow, it's finally come out. And everybody was so surprised. And I'm like, guys, they talked about this a while ago. And I went back into the research to figure out, but it had taken, so it's been years since they've been given permission to have the mutual fund window, and now the TSP is finally doing it.
Wow.
So just because something is said that, yes, this is available or this is how things should work, doesn't mean that TSP is going to be implementing that particular piece of legislation right away because of everything they have to do on their end to make it work. It is completely different than dealing with other investments and everything else. And so that is what's in the TSP, or I'm sorry, that is what is in the Secure Act 2.0, but now they have to implement it. Right. So let's give the TSP time to work on that because they're not
Let's give
thinking
them
about.
20 years. Let's do that.
I'll let you guys know when that happens. Okay, we'll
I
just
know.
just stay on top with Fed Pilot, and we will let you know what changes are going to be happening and when TSP is on the ball
Yes.
with this. Right.
Yeah. And that's why we highly recommend you not only come to a workshop, online, in person, whatever, but you also maybe do so every few years because things change. And you never know when they're going to change. All of a sudden the TSP will say, here, there you go. And for 90% of the people in our workshops to not know that there are drastic changes to the TSP blows me away. Understandable, but still, you need to
Yes.
know that these kind of things change. And little things, little changes like the RMD can make a big difference in your planning and how you're going to be doing things.
It can. Obviously, it affects people in their older ages. But if you know that, okay, well, I'm hitting close to 70 or 72, I need to consider required minimum distributions. What does that look like? Not just for the TSP, but maybe some other investments that I have
Right.
or annuities or
Right.
what have you. And
Mm-hmm.
how does it all coordinate together? Because TSP is its own separate entity. Even if you're required to have minimum distributions taken from one entity or altogether you have several different investments, you can't aggregate with the TSP. Like that's a whole nother can of worms to deal with. And that's why it's very important to talk to a financial professional who understands the federal benefits and how that all coordinates together to make sure that you're doing what you need to do and that you're not going to get extra income and increase your taxes because of something you thought was true wasn't.
Yep. And I'll add to there, Cassie, and that's a really, really good point because when someone talks with a profession, a, an advisor, for example, a financial professional that understands federal employees, they understand the difference between what the federal employees get and what the regular Americans get. For example, Roth, everyone, people say, oh, I love the Roth. Well, the Roth doesn't work the same way for federal employees in the TSP as it does in an IRA for everyone else. And
Right.
so there are different rules. And I mean, we could go on and on and on about these different rules and how if you try to do it one way, you actually either can't or you're doing it wrong. You're doing it backwards because the rules for you are different. And so it's so important to make sure that you have someone who is focused on federal employees who understands the difference between what the real world gets and what you get, because it's not all, sometimes it is the same, sometimes it's not, sometimes it changes when it is and when it isn't, and they have to be up to date on that.
Right, absolutely. And maybe that's another topic that we hit in another video is the
Yeah.
difference between regular investments like an IRA or annuity, or something like that, as opposed to the TSP, because I think that can be very, very instrumental when employees are planning because the TSP should not be your only investment. That's personal belief. Some believe otherwise, especially the TSP. But I mean, let's just talk about simply investing right now and tying up your money. Because right now, if somebody is tied in the G fund within the TSP, your money's at risk. Okay. Just in the G fund alone, it not only doesn't keep up with inflation, but right now they're talking about utilizing people's investments for the debt ceiling if something doesn't change. And
So
I
let's
think they're saying that they're already doing that, and that is scary.
let's actually hold that off for the next video because
Okay.
we can really dive into that one as well. But you're right on. And that's a good cliffhanger. That is a good teaser for the next video that we do together. Yeah, it's a thing. So
Yeah. Stay tuned.
yeah, stay tuned. Watch the other videos as well, and let's make that the next topic. Let's do that next. Thanks for
So
watching, everyone. Take care.